Hello, hi. I see some people joining. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar organized by WeUni in partnership with Espol Business School. Today we are here to talk about a really important topic. Actually, the topic of today is Europe, its identity and values in time of crisis. So the questions that we are we are taking in consideration today are: does a coherent European identity exist? And also, what are the common European values that bind us together? Today you will have the possibility to assist to this really interesting debate on these topics, and also to have an overview with to the Espol Business School, to the different courses that Espol offers. In particular, you will see and you will explore deeper the Master in Multilevel Governance in Europe, that takes this exploration of today further, and that will give you the tools to critically analyze these processes and understand the forces that guide European life today. As you can see here, today I will not be alone. I'm here with Oriane Caligaro. She is an associate professor of political science at Espol. So today, actually, we have a really tight agenda, and we will learn something more about the European situation and also about the Espol educational offer. Of course, you will have the possibility to interact with Oriane, but also with Lucy, that is here to help us to answer to some questions about Espol. You can type all your questions in the Q&A box here, and we will go through them at the end of the presentation. So don't worry and don't be shy. Just type all of your questions and we'll be back to you at the end. And I would like to remind to all the students connected that are interested in receiving the certificate of attendance that you can click on the link that I'll share with you at the end of this webinar. You will see the link in the chat at the end of the webinar, and you will, of course, obtain the certificate. So for those who just joined us, hello. You're very welcome. We are here with Espol. Unfortunately, we can't see your faces, but of course, if we want to write us in the chat and tell us where you're from, you can do it, because we are really curious to know your nationality. And I think that without further ado, I can now leave the floor to Oriane, because we have a really full agenda. So Oriane, if you want, the floor is yours. Enjoy this webinar and see you later. Thank you. I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't want to disturb your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. So yes, my name is Oriane Caligaro. I've been a professor at Espol for many years now, 8 years exactly. And as you will see from my presentation, I teach mostly about EU-related issues, EU institutions, EU policies, and in particular, indeed, in this master in multi-level governance in Europe that I will describe after my talk. I have this indeed very general topic about European identity. But I think it's a very relevant topic today, because you know that Europe and also the European Union is facing many challenges, and you can even call them crises, geopolitical crises, with obviously the war in Ukraine, the rising tensions with our historical ally, the United States, tensions also in many fields, trade conflicts, and also many divergences in geopolitical choices. So I think in this very tense context, it's really worthy re-exploring what makes a European community, and whether there is something like a European identity that brings the Europeans together. So I will start sharing my slides. And so identity and values, as you will see, because obviously values are also part of what makes a common identity and a community. So first of all, we need to remind us that Europe is very difficult to define, even geographically. Oops, sorry. So what is Europe? First question. So you here have this old cartoon representing a bit the chaos of all the European nations. And even geographically, Europe can have many definitions. If you take, for instance, an old organization that was created in the 17th, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, you have 57 participating states. And so you have states from Canada, Vancouver, to Vladivostok in Russia. And it's still called a European organization. If you take the Council of Europe that was created in 1949, today you have 46 member states, including Turkey, Ukraine. Russia was member, but was excluded after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And now, even if you take the European Union, you know that today we have 27 member states. So as you see, much less than the Council of Europe, for instance. It's a much smaller Europe. And even in this Europe, you have the Eurozone, in which you have only 19 states, and the Schengen area, 22. So you know, for the free movement of people. So the territory, even of the European Union, is very flexible. And it's interesting to see that in the legal text founding the European Union, you never have the mentioning of the territory. Precisely because, as we know, also because of the enlargement, the geography of what is called the European Union can evolve over time. So a first answer to question would say that European identity cannot be defined through geography. So if not geography, sorry. You still have my slides? Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So you would say, if it's not the geography, could it be a shared history? So you know that there are many elements in the long-term history that we could describe as a common European history. The medieval Christianity, the big transformations through which many regions of Europe went through with the Renaissance, the Reformation, humanism, scientific revolution, and I could go on, the Enlightenment, etc. But again, as you probably know from your own national experiences, these different big historical trends, they've been experienced sometimes in very different ways in different European nations and in different European regions. So it's true that sometimes they bring us together, but not always. There is a diversity also of historical trajectories. And on top of this, I mentioned now the nations. The nation is actually a European creation, this political entity of the nation. And there is a plurality of nations in Europe. And the European Union itself is based on nations whose diversity is recognized and protected. So the European Union is both a supranational organization in some regards, but it's also the protector of national sovereignty and national identities. In that sense, you can never get rid of this national reality. So now, if you look at what the European Union is, the European Union, as you know, emerged after the Second World War. And the idea was, after the disastrous experiences of the First and Second World Wars, the idea was to bring the peoples of Europe is initially through economic links and trade and common markets, so that a war between them will become impossible. And indeed, this is the most, let's say, successful project, in the sense that we have today in the European Union a very deep economic integration. But what is a bit paradoxical is that even though so many standards, regulations that impact our life today, and there is more or less, we say that more or less 80% of the regulations that impact European citizens' life are produced or partly produced at the European level, so at the EU level. I will then talk later about our master multi-level governance. And this is a reality today. The European level of governance is absolutely determining for the inhabitants of the European Union. But in the same time, the identification with the European Union as a political entity is relatively low, especially, again, if you compare with the influence of the European Union, both inside but also at the geopolitical level. And when I say a low level of identification, is that, there are many surveys that are conducted regularly to ask people whether they feel more citizens of their country, their nation, or citizens of the European Union. Most of the time, what remains the primarily level of identification, it's the nation state. People do feel European. It's not very low. Usually on EU average, we are around 30–40% of the people who feel somehow Europeans. But when you really ask about the European Union, the institutions, then the identification is not so high. And here, it's a very important paradox, because you have, on the one hand, a very powerful organization that tends to be more and more a political union, but in the same time, the individuals forming this community do not necessarily feel strongly European, or they don't strongly identify with the institutions. And this raises a very important question when we think in political science, is that that a political power, at least if we live in a democracy, needs to have a minimum of legitimacy. You as a citizen, you need to recognize yourself in the political institutions that govern your life. So many political scientists ask themselves, can the EU remain legitimate as a political power if people do not have a strong European identity? So you see that I'm asking also this question of European identity because it also asks the question of the sustainability of the European Union as a political project. And because European identity and the very idea of an identification of the citizens, because it's so important for any political project, the European Union has been concerned about identity for many years now. And actually, it's not so obvious because I reminded you before that after the Second World War, the European project started mostly as an economic project, the creation of a common market. But progressively, this economic project gained more and more competencies and more areas. And today the European Union has many competencies in terms of internal security in Europe, judicial cooperation, external policy, especially in the context today. And many policies of the European Union touch upon fundamental rights. So you see that we came way after just an economic integration. So that's why this question of identification is very important. So that's why from, let's say, the late 70s, early 80s, 1980s, the European Union, the institutions, but also political leaders at the national level, they started thinking about, do we really reach the citizens? And that's why there has been this reflection on a common European identity and where we can concretely find it and promote it. So before wondering how we can find and promote, foster a common European identity, we first need to remember what makes a collective identity. So a collective identity of a big community of humans. I give you some essential elements, but of course you could add many others. A common language, and here again, think about the national example. A common language, but we have to we need to say also that there are nations that are multilingual. But very often language plays an important role in the collective identity, a shared history, common myth. So, to have those big narratives that sometimes they are based on historical facts, but sometimes they relate also to more mythical elements. And it's stories that everybody in the community knows. And it makes us a community. We remind us of the same stories. We were told the same stories. More abstractly, there are values, and I will go back to a bit later on these very important elements, the values. So values, it's moral elements that guide what a community thinks is good or wrong, but it can also take legal dimensions. The values, it's what is at the basis of fundamental principles of democracy, of different freedoms, etc. And also a community, a collective identity can be based on our common ideals, our worldviews, etc. And there is a last element that is also very important, and I will also come back to this later. It's the identification of a common other and potentially a common enemy. Because even when you define yourself, very often you define yourself as belonging to a group, but because in the same time you do not belong to other groups. So the dynamic of inclusion and exclusion is central to a collective identity. But of course, we know that when you define others, you can also precisely exclude. So defining identity through otherness can be problematic. So now let's move to the European level. You maybe know that the motto of the European Union is united in diversity. I told you before that the European Union is also the defender of the national diversities. But if we are united, what unites us as Europeans? And here again, I make the comparison with the national level. All the key instruments that are used by the nation states to forge a collective identity and to maintain a collective identity over time, these key instruments, they are still under the control of precisely the member states of the European Union. They are not among the competencies of the European Union. So you see, again, this multi-level governance. So if you look at education, primary education, secondary education, even higher education, the European Union has very little competencies in this regard, even zero competencies if you take really primary and secondary schools. There is no common language. The EU is essentially multilingual. We have very little shared rituals at the European level. Maybe we can discuss if you find some. Okay, we have the European elections. We have a common anthem. But again, compared with the national level, it's very little. Even more problematically, we don't have European media. You know today how much media are crucial in shaping public opinion and in creating collective identities. The media sphere remain mostly national, or it's global and increasingly influenced by multinationals like, the GAFAM, the big social networks. And here they are not even at control at the national level, neither by the European level. They are controlled worldwide by private actors, which is another democratic issue. And finally, again, another element, I will not mention them all, but the fundamental element that was really crucial in shaping national identities, it's the common army and it's the experience of war. Fortunately, our generations, and I'm sorry, I don't know where you all come from, but I speak here from the point of view of member states of the European Union. Most of them in the newer generations, they did not directly experience war. And as you know, this is changing because there is a war now going on at the door of Europe in the candidate country, Ukraine. And precisely now, maybe Europe is changing its discourse on defense and on the role of the army in a common identity. But again, I will come back to this. But you see that at least if you look at the decades of the post-war construction of the European project, all these identity forging instruments, they were never in the hand of the European institutions. And I just wanted to give you this quote by Timothy Garton Ash saying, because, very often people say, yes, the EU is not very democratic. There is a democratic deficit. And one reason is precisely this lack of identification. But he says, in the end, this democratic problem, it's not so much Brussels in the sense, it's not so much the European institutions, it's Babel. It's the fact that we have this irreducible multilingualism, which will explain that it will always be very difficult to create a common identity. So despite this diversity, the European Union, again, tried at some point to develop some actions to show that we do share common elements. And one dimension is indeed to highlight that we have something like a common history and a common heritage. And initially, it very much insisted on, logically, on the most positive and glorious dimensions of this shared past. And here again, you can pick many different things to build this sort of common European narrative. Of course, you could say that we all share somehow the Greek and Roman civilizations, the Greek democracy, the Roman legal system. You can consider that we share at different levels, in different ways, a Christian tradition. As I told you before, we experience the revolution of the Renaissance, of humanism, of the scientific revolutions, the Enlightenment, etc., and so on. And here again, you can choose, you can pick and choose what you think represents better our common heritage. You can also, and this is related to this previous historical heritage, you can, of course, highlight different achievements of the European continent in the field of culture, the economy, technology, law, politics, and I will give you some examples. So the European Union did this in different cultural programs, educational programs. I give you an example. There is a program that is called the European Heritage Label. The European Union started funding actions to safeguard the European architectural heritage to start with already in the 80s, and it continued to develop, and this program was created in the 2000s. And you see, it's interesting because so you have the logo of this program, and in the background, what you see, maybe you recognized it, it's the Acropolis in Athens and the Parthenon. And of course, in this European narrative that you will hear in the mouth of different European leaders, again, in the programs of different European institutions, in this narrative, Greece, ancient Greece, Athenian democracy is very often given as the starting point, as the cradle of our European identity. And not very surprisingly, this program says Europe starts here on the Acropolis in Athens. I'll give you another example because I was talking before that we are lacking big common rituals when we speak about the European Union. Well, you have some big political rituals on the occasion of the signing of important treaties. Again, one example among many others. The Treaty of Accession for 10 new member states so they joined in 2004, but the treaty was signed in Athens in 2003. And you see here you have this family picture of the heads of states and governments that were in Athens. So again, the place was not chosen by chance to act this reunification of the French, sorry, because it's written in French, of the European family. They chose Athens and they took the family picture in front of a Greek temple. So you could say this is a type of European political ritual here, taking Athens as a background. Now, when it comes to illustrating this glorious shared heritage, actually, you can find it on the national signs of the Eurocoins. You know that some countries of the European Union, not all of them, share a single currency, the euro. And again, united in diversity, the banknotes are fully European. They are common to all the member states. But the coins, if you look at if you have some coins in your pockets now, the coins have a common European side and a national side. And on the national sides, you find precisely those glorious illustrations of European culture and European history. So let's take some example. The Greek coin here has the Princess Europa. Greek mythology, it's Greek, but Europa gave her name to the continent. And she's also now often used as a symbol of Europe. I don't know if you recognize the face next to Europa. This is Dante Alighieri, Italian poet, the founder of the Italian language. Next to him, it's a famous drawing by, maybe you find, Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci. So an Italian contribution to European genius. Next coin, Cervantes, great Spanish author, part, of course, of a European and I would say even universal literary heritage. Following one, now we move from literature to music. This is Mozart. Mozart, again, Mozart, a very European figure. Indeed, he was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he lived in Vienna, but he also lived in Prague. So he was very European, but logically, he was claimed by the Austrians for their euro coin. And the last one, maybe it's a less known face. This is again Austria, and this time this is Berta von Stuttner. She's a very famous pacifist, especially in the pre- and interwar period. So you could say all these examples could be part of a European narrative, and somehow they are part of this European narrative. They are on the euro coins, but from a national side of the coin. As you know, the European banknotes, if you observe them, they are purely European, right? You don't have national versions of the European banknotes. And when they did the first, they designed the first series of banknotes, they could not agree on common faces. So it was too complicated because they thought that there would be national biases because you don't have enough banknotes to put faces from all the different member states. So they thought this will create too much tension. So we get rid of faces and we just keep those architectural symbols. So if you look at the current series, you have doors and windows of different ages of architectural styles in Europe. So you could say it's also an image of these common cultural features, but only through architecture, no people, no faces. Which is a bit ironic because precisely when you want to make a common identity, usually you look for common narratives, and a good narrative, you have people inside, right? You have some heroes. And maybe they will appear. By the way, a short parenthesis, very small, if you look closely or if you have a banknote next to you, there is now a very tiny face on the euro banknotes. It's the face of Europa. She's on the hologram and in the watermark. So it's what, when you look through the banknote, you can see the face of a lady. This is Europa. But she was not in the initial series. She was introduced later on in 2015. But as you see, there is a face, but it's not a very visible face. You really have to search hard to find her. So now I go back to my following slide. There is currently a competition, a selection process for the future series of euro banknotes. And so I cannot, we will probably know soon in spring. I cannot tell you whether it's going to be this series because there are two themes that are in competition, and designers can propose in each of these themes either nature and biodiversity or precisely figures showing great European achievements in the field of arts, technology, politics, etc. And by the way, the people that I will show you now, they were already chosen before the competition. So the designers, they are proposing now different designs, but with these people for each denomination. So I don't know if you can see now on your screen. The first one is the Greek operatic singer Marakalas. Then you have, if I go down to 20 euro, it's very small. This is a woman again, and this is Maria Montessori, a pioneer in education, and she was also a pacifist, an activist in many areas, Italian woman. Then we have, if we go to the 200, it's again a woman, and it's the same one. It's the Austrian Berta von Stutter, so this pacifist activist. Then we have again Cervantes. So you see, it's really interesting because faces that you had on the national side of the coins, of the euro coins, they might, and it's not sure yet, they might end up on finally common European banknotes. So you could say on a common European narrative. And I continue. You have Beethoven, a musician, of course, who actually gave us the European anthem. The Ode to Joy that was chosen as a European anthem is a symphony by Beethoven. And finally, this is, I have a doubt, I think this is Erasmus. It could be Da Vinci, but this is not Da Vinci. I think this is Erasmus, a leading figure of humanism from Rotterdam, so today's Netherlands. And if you look again closely, you still have the face of Europa. So again, a reference to our common Greek roots in the watermark of this banknote. Again, to be continued, because the final results, so the final new iconographies will be revealed, I think, sometime now in spring. But what I found revealing in this is that, you see, we started with banknotes that could not really tell a story with people because there was this tension with the national level. And now we are 20 years, more than 25 years later. And now apparently the European institutions are ready to show faces for their common European narrative. Now, I will move on a bit faster. Now, as you see, I was talking only about a positive past and positive achievements. But if we remember again how the European project was born, it was born because of wars, to put an end of unending wars, which is actually, unfortunately, one of the most common feature of the Europeans over the long time. And this is something that evolved. It's mostly from the 90s, after the end of the communist regimes. There was a sort of memorial turn in Europe, and the different European nations starting more officially facing their common past of war. Because before this, it was the starting point of the integration process, but it was not discussed. We were concentrating on reconstruction, reconciliation, economic growth. And this confrontation with the past at the European level really started in the 90s and in the 2000s. And what came first was the condemnation, of course, and the remembrance of past crimes. And the first crime that was collectively remembered, recognized, and collectively remembered was the Holocaust, the extermination of European Jews by the Nazi regime. And then, so that's why the first common European Day of Remembrance that was adopted in 1995 was the 27th January, liberation of the camp of Auschwitz. It became this Remembrance Day for the Holocaust. But with the enlargement to Central and Eastern European countries, it was also, of course, necessary to enlarge this narrative of the past crimes to the crimes of the Stalinist regimes. And Stalinist regime and communist regime. That's why there was a new European Day of Remembrance created this time in 2009. So you see after the enlargement. And it's the 23rd of August, which is the date of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact between the Nazi regime and the Stalinist USSR, this pact, this secret pact of non-aggression. What is important to note, though, so there is a process of recognition of the past of criminal regimes in Europe, but what is still not discussed fully at the European level, it's the European crimes outside Europe through colonialism and imperialism. This will take time, but this is obviously part also of a common European identity. But this is still an open chapter. And I need now a bit to, I have 5 minutes left, and I will, of course, keep time to present our programs here at Espol. So you see that this remembrance of past crimes is very much related to also promoting common values, because when you condemn the Nazi regime, the fascist regimes, and the communist regimes, you condemned their breaches of fundamental values. And it's interesting to see, I told you that there are not clear boundaries of the European continent to join the European Union. But if a state wants to join the European Union, they need to commit to promote the values. And where are these European values? They are now enshrined in the treaty, Article 2, respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. These are the values enshrined in the treaty, and this is also what makes the European Union a community of value, and of values, of course, in the plural. So this is also a challenge, because as you know, some of these fundamental rights and values are repeatedly breached in different European member states. Especially, there's been a long-standing conflict between the EU and some member states, Hungary, Poland, in different moments and stages. And the EU so far has not proved very efficient in maintaining the pressure on member states. So again, a common identity, but not fully established. And this is my final slide of the talk. Very topical today. What about finding an other against which Europeans can unite? In the past, there have been different significant others. If you take the medieval time of the Crusades and different Christian kingdoms, they would rally against Islam to free, the Holy Land. This has been something very structural in the medieval times. Then this other could take the face of the Ottoman Empire also for many centuries. Then the USSR was also an other during the Cold War, of course. The other could be, if you look today at far-right ethno-nationalist parties, the migrants are described as others against which we need to defend a certain European identity according to their definition, which is, again, ultra-nationalist and racist. So you can find also others inside the community. And this is where, of course, the construction of another can be very dangerous. And of course, the final point, it's these very significant others that Europe has to face today at the geopolitical level. It's, of course, Russia, with the invasion, the war started by Russia against Ukraine. and a more surprising enemy. So now I'm even using the word enemy, even if it's strong, but it's definitely no longer an ally. It's, of course, the USA of Trump. And we could wonder, and of course, I leave it open. You know that because of the war in Russia, there is an acceleration of this effort of a common defense in Europe. So on this side, the Europeans are moving much faster than before, and potentially this could reinforce a common identity. And the many threats represented by Trump on many different fronts at the commercial level, but also all the threats to European democracy through its support to the GAFAM and the intrusion of those American big tech in our privacy, in our public opinion in many ways. This also pushed the Europeans to unite to defend precisely their values. So will these two, I analyzed Putin, Trump, but of course it's the Russia and USA, will they be the best catalyst for European identity? We will see in the upcoming years. And I show you again an image you saw for the significant other. This is a picture of the 30s, and you see here that the significant other threatening Europe was the Russian bear, and it was at the time of the USSR. And today, here I give you an example of how migrants can be depicted as the significant other. So this is this infamous cover of a Polish magazine in 2016, representing how dark hands threaten this allegory of Europe. So this is again an ultra-nationalist, racist narrative, but that is unfortunately gaining visibility in Europe today. And to finish, the one that I was mentioning before, Putin on his bear, again, Russia represented on the bear, and Ursula von der Leyen taking the arms to resist, and Trump playing with the future of Europe. So I will stop here to spend a few minutes presenting our master in Espol, the master multi-level governance in Europe. Actually, I think you perceived in my talk many points that we discuss in this program. This is a 2-year program in Lille. And why this program is unique? Because we discuss precisely the complexity of this European governance, in which some competencies are at the national level or even the regional level, other competencies are at the European level, and even sometimes at the global one. So how can we make sense of those different levels of governance that influence our daily life? And we address this both by looking at, let's say, the technocratic dimensions, because we need to understand how these different institutions work, especially the European institutions, because they are so influential in Europe today. But we also speak in terms of political democratic processes. I was talking to you about legitimacy. Do people really identify with the European Union? So we look also at this seen not only from the institutions, but from the people, from the public opinion, from the civil society. So we really want to explore this. And what we do, what is also very strong in our program, is that, of course, we make you read the state-of-the-art scientific literature. We introduce you to the most important theories, but we also give you a lot of real-world policy example, real case studies. We work a lot with practitioners working in EU institutions, and this is very present in our teaching. And so we are also very close to Brussels, which can help us to bring some practitioners to Lille. And by the way, you will make study trip precisely to Brussels during the program. You will have a study trip to Berlin. And what is very important also is that we do all this in very small classes. So we have you students have the possibility to present a lot your own research. We organize a lot of debates, sometimes to recreate even some negotiations in those multi-level governance. So this is for our master, the one in which I teach personally. And finally, of course, to say a few words about Espol. So this is this European school for political and social sciences. This is based in Lille, and Lille is very ideal to work on this multi-level governance because you are very close to Brussels. Brussels is half an hour away by train. I personally live in Brussels. But you're also very close to Paris, and you have Lille, which is also a very important European city. And Espol is also a very dynamic campus, very multicultural, very international. You have a very important share of international students in our master programs. Obviously, we speak English, but you will hear other languages. Also, the occasion to learn French if you wish. So this is definitely many of the strengths of our beautiful school and beautiful master programs. I was very long, but we still have time, and I will stay as long as needed to answer to your questions. Just, I realize I forgot a final slides, but you will have other occasions to discover our other programs. Climate and sustainability, absolutely crucial. International and security politics. And finally, digital politics and governance. You see that they are all crucial issues that we actually deal with also in our multi-level governance. And sometimes you can benefit because we mutualize also some classes from these different programs. So you see that we have experts in many of these areas at Espol in our staff. And now I definitely stop, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Oriane, for the presentation. We received a really interesting for a couple of information about Espol, of course, but also we attended a very interesting debate about the European situation. So I see that we have some questions, actually. If you agree, I can proceed reading you the first one. That is, in which sense the problem of Europe is bubble and not Brussels, according also to the quote of Esch?
Okay. Yeah, so this quote, it was to a bit nuanced because, you know, and probably you've been exposed yourself to this, what we call sometimes the EU blaming, that many issues of democratic deficit comes from the lack of transparency of the European institutions, that their democratic processes or legal processes are too complex. There is certainly a part of truth in this. I do not deny this. But actually, in the courses in which I explore precisely European institutions and policies, today in the EU, we've reached actually a very high level of democratic control. There are some weaknesses. I recognize this. But what the quote wanted to point out is that, okay, certainly there are some institutional complexities, but this is not the main problem to explain why people do not sufficiently identify with the European Union. According to this author, even more significant is this irreducible cultural diversity, and to start with this linguistic diversity. And here again, it's not just to say, because fortunately more and more Europeans are multilingual, but again, it depends where and who. It's not, again, the problem of having so many languages is not a problem. You could even say it's a strength for Europe. But the problem is also in terms of democracy, it's how it makes an obstacle for having what political scientists call a European public sphere. The public sphere is this space where people can communicate to precisely decide in common what they think are the common issues of the community and how to resolve these issues. And this public sphere, it goes through common political parties and very often the media, as I told you. And again, when you have this, again, to speak politics, usually you speak politics in your mother tongue, right? And you engage in politics most of the time with the media that speak your language, and also the political parties, the political groups that relate to you in your mother tongue. And that's why Garton Ash was insisting on this very big limit of Babel, that it's difficult to talk politics when you don't share a common language. And the problem is that then it's reserved to a multilingual elite, but it leaves many people outside. This was the meaning of this quote.
Thank you so much. And do you believe that in a European Union with diverse cultures, or it should be a common identity only with categorization of people?
So I personally believe, and because what I was describing you are institutional efforts to promote political institutional efforts to promote a certain common narrative. But in the research that I did myself, I have to admit that very often it's not very successful, or some of them can have a certain impact. But my impression is that when you try to impose an identity top down, it doesn't work. And of course, it will be extremely dangerous and non-democratic and against all the European values to reduce or to fight the diversity of cultures. This is the contrary of what European identity means. So actually, the search for a common narrative should never come with the objective of weakening or attacking diversity. Certainly not. Why not searching common narratives when they don't harm or exclude anyone? Why not? All political powers have tried to do this, but certainly not at the cost of cultural diversity.
Perfect, thank you. And could you explain again why there are emphases in the banknotes?
So this is a long story that I analyzed. Actually, I started this in my PhD research, because actually when they started to propose themes and to have a competition, many designers spontaneously, they came up with faces. So sometimes it was historical faces like the one I showed you. So why not Da Vinci, Mozart, and so on. But the central bankers, so you know that now we have the European central banks. So it was at the time those responsible for deciding in the end were the governors of the different central banks. And these people, they are technocrats, right? They are economists or they are civil servants. And for them, what was the most important was to have a consensus. You cannot have banknotes, so the first common European money that could create debates or even controversies between member states or between people. It was their first fear. And they thought if we start putting faces, people would necessarily relate these faces to a certain member state. Because if you put Da Vinci, you could say, okay, Da Vinci is a universal genius. Yes, but now he's identified as Italian. And so this was for them the absolute no-go. We don't want to create debates, controversies. So the best way was to avoid any face, even in an abstract face. As long as you have a human face, maybe you will start having discussions. So to avoid any difficulty, they chose a design only with those architectural features.
And last but not least, we have another question that is, how does the digital divide or social media influence the fragmentation of European identity today?
So as I told you, we have specialists at Espol who would be very good at answering this. It's really not my field of research, but the digital transition is indeed crucial in terms of democracy. Because, and here it's at, so of course, you were talking about the digital divide. So I think you also talk about that certain social groups have less access to the internet and of course this creates many inequalities, obviously, because now we see that, for instance, traditional media are less and less strong. Many public debates took place through the internet, and also there are more and more public services that are being digitalized, and this you can see this in many areas. I don't know, just even for the taxes or for the access of certain social benefits, etc. Now it has to go through digital platforms, and unfortunately, still today, even younger people, they do not have the same level of digital literacy. So obviously, it creates many inequalities, and it's of course a huge problem. And at another level that I mentioned in my talk is that because, again, related to the public sphere, because so many political debates now take place through social media, the question is, who shapes those social media? And you know that the stronger, the most influential social media today are mostly US based. So what we call, the big techs, the technological giants. And unfortunately, we've seen this increasingly in the last years. These big tech giants have embraced also political ideas that are very problematic, very much more and more aligned to this nationalist, ideology of Trump, to put it short. And so you see the huge problem, because here we are at a level where first you have social media that are not so media, because this is where people discuss again and get their ideas. They are no longer ideologically neutral, and they can intervene in the democratic life of many countries in the world, and starting with the EU, and then influence, of course, the democratic processes. And we have instances in which indeed some GAFAM deliberately try to influence certain electoral campaigns. And beyond this, and I will stop here, another threat to democracy is also because, as you know, those technological giants have access to our data in many different ways. All the data we produce while being online, and it gives them a huge power. And that's why there is this very hot issue today of digital sovereignty. You've heard about this. And this is why it is today very high on the EU agenda for all the implications that I just told you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think we are done with all the questions. I see also that Lucy have sent a message in the chat that I'm copying here for all the students connected. You can see the link about the Masters in Multilevel Governance. Of course, you can click on the link and take all the information that you need. I would also like to remind to all the students connected that we have recorded this webinar. So we will send you the link to watch it in case you have missed anything or in case you want to take some information again and want to watch this amazing presentation. And also we will send you the contacts of Espol. So in case you have any other questions also about the application process, the accommodations, the possibility of scholarships, all that you want, you can contact directly the team of Espol. And of course, they are always really available and they can answer to all your questions. And I've also shared with you in the chat the link to obtain the certificate of attendance. So you can click on it and obtain the certificate, of course. I'd like to thank Oriane for the really interesting presentation, for her presence today. It was really interesting to hear about these, let's say, news, but not only news, of course. So thank you so much. And thanks to all the students connected.